You're listening to Two Bobs, conversations on the art of creative entrepreneurship with David C. Baker and Blair Enns.
David Baker wrote a book.
Are you sure it was just me? I think it might have been both of us wrote it. I was looking. I knew you were going to talk to me about this today, and I was looking back over some of the parts of the book, and I discovered, well, that you actually wrote a part of it, and you didn't know it. I mean, I had to give you some credit, but I did write the book. But you've had a lot of impact on what's in this book. I'll tell you, it's referenced several pages in here. So before you get all pissed off, read the whole thing so you can discover where I give you credit. But I did write a book. Yeah.
Wow, good for you. It's you're the silent co-author on pretty much everything I write too, so that's fine. It all works out, and I think we're both better for it. And there's nothing in here I read, and I read it twice now. There's nothing in here I read where I thought, that's mine. That's not fair. But I have smiled a few times seeing my influence, and I'm only aware of, some of your influence, only a percentage of the influence that you've had on my stuff. So
thank you.
It's part of a great collaboration. Okay, enough of the love in. Let's rip this thing apart.
Well, that was a pretty short love in, but yeah, go ahead.
The book is called The Business of Expertise, How Entrepreneurial Experts Convert Insight to Impact and Wealth, written by David C. Baker, published by whom? Who's your publisher on this thing?
Rockbench Publishing Corp. They've published.
Never heard of them.
Never heard of them. They have one book that's sold an inordinate number of copies. It's our worst book ever. It's called The Win Without Pitching Manifesto, as I recall. Now, Rockbench has published 30-some, 40-some books. They're all written in a B2B environment about expertise of some kind. So they publish this as well.
So you a few years ago, you decided to launch your own publishing imprint. We certainly haven't done a show on this, but let's just talk about this a little bit now, because I think we'll end up talking about the book and the contents of the book over probably a few podcasts. I want to talk about some of the foundational elements in it today. And then I suspect the chapters that follow some of them may end up being an area of focus for just individual webcasts down the road. But I do want to begin by talking a little bit about the authoring process, which is Canadian for process. Yeah. And also let's start with publishing. You tell us a little bit about Rockbench, why you chose to launch this publishing imprint, and then following up on that, just because you've published previous books of yours through your own publishing company, it doesn't depending on what you're trying to accomplish with the book, it doesn't necessarily make sense to publish everything of yours through your publishing company, but you've chosen to do that. So start, if you would, with why you launched Rockbench, and then why you chose to publish this through Rockbench.
Even before I owned an agency, I was going through grad school. It was a 6-long-year process, and I was working at a publisher, and I really enjoyed the process. I started out as a foreign language typesetter, doing all the languages that were right to left, and then worked my way up and was eventually managing the place. And anyway, fast forward, owned an agency for 6 years, started this. I had 3 contracts in hand for my third book, which is the one on managing people. And I'm looking at these contracts, and they all looked pretty similar. And I was just kind of down to the last decision point, like which of these 3 should I use? And as I was dealing with some of the folks on the other end of the phone, I was just so discouraged, because these were editorial folks. They were acquisition editors, and they didn't know really anything about my field, and they kept trying to encourage me to water down the basic concepts and piggyback on concepts that were hot at the moment, so that the book would be able to sort of hook on to that popularity. And I just decided, okay, that is enough. I'm going to create a publishing firm. I knew how to do it. It's a real publishing firm. It's a separate corporation. We have MSAs with all the big boys, including Amazon and Apple and Ingram and the library distributors and so on. And so it was partly as a place to house my own work, but it was mainly a place so that we could offer other authors who wouldn't necessarily get the correct hearing an opportunity to publish their work. It wasn't really about money. It's a neutral company in the sense that we don't make money. We just try to break even. But it's meant to return most of the money to the authors, to give them an opportunity to build a big platform. That one of the main differences is instead of getting 10 author copies, which is typical for an author, we let them print and keep as many copies as they want, 1,000, 2,000, because the idea is that you're supposed to give away one copy for every 2 copies you sell. Writing a book for you and I isn't just about the money, it's about the bigger platform that it gives you. And so this publishing arm is meant to conform to that notion rather than a traditional publishing platform.
Okay, and there's nothing about this book on the business of expertise, and we'll dive into what that means, but there's nothing about this book that made you think, well, maybe this one I should go to a mainstream publisher.
Well, I do take some risks in the book, and it was nervous. This could just be in my mind. I was nervous that some traditional acquisition editor might take offense with some of the things I said. There was a little bit about that. But no, other than that, no, it'd be something that I would have probably gone to Wiley, I would guess.
Okay. Let's talk about, before we get into the book, I was on a podcast recently, somebody else's podcast, and they asked me about the Win Without Pitching Manifesto, and the question was, how did I write it? And the book is almost 7 years old now, and I said, well, I don't remember how I wrote it, but I remember I did the final sprint was I wrote every day for the last 6 months. And then after I was listening to the podcast afterwards, I thought, well, that's silly. It was 6 weeks, not 6 months.
Yeah.
But I didn't keep track of how I wrote it or even how long I spent writing it. But you took some notes as you went, didn't you?
Well, I thought I might create a website, which actually is going to go live in about a week. It'll probably be live by the time this is broadcast. It's called expertise.is. And I wanted to be able to create the backstory for the book. And so I took all kinds of pictures as I'm writing, and I wrote down all the time it took. I've got a record of all the money in the book and so on. So yeah, I did. And like you, I started outlining and researching this book about 1.5 years ago, and that's the hard work for me. We're probably all very different, but for me, the hard part is researching and outlining. And then when I was really ready to write, as in the research outline is done, and I can just sit down at a keyboard and not have to refer to anything but that outline, that's when it's really fun. To me, it's like I've built all the walls and the drywall is up, and now I'm getting to paint it whatever color I want. I enjoy that part of the process. The other part is harder for me. And so I did very similar to what you did. It took me about 6 weeks or so, writing almost every day, get up early. I try to write 2,500 to 3,500, sometimes 4,000 words a day, finish by usually late morning or early afternoon, and then play the rest of the day, either read or go do some photography or go on a long hike, and then get all ready to do it. So I basically closed the business down for that 6 weeks, and during that time is when the book really took shape. And then, of course, in addition to all the, this as an author, all the outlining and research that occurs at the beginning, then you've got so much work afterwards. There's so much editing and thinking and the illustrations and so on. So, but the heart of it was about 6 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a meeting the other day with the team that's working on launching my next book, and I said, okay, I'm a few days away from being done writing, but then there's still editing and everything else, and so I had this really unrealistic timeline about when we're going to launch, and
what unrealistic? What this is a first.
Yeah. And he said this is a workbook type, manual type book on pricing, and the designer said something. I tweeted it was so he really put me in my place. He said, "I think you're confusing print on demand with design on demand with print on demand." Anyway, oh yeah, and perhaps editing on demand as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so you all right? That's and you've. I think these are hours. You sent me a list of the 80 hours of research, 20 hours to outline,
right?
132 hours to write, and then, wow, that's impressive. I can't believe you wrote a book in 132 hours.
Well, that's only because I'd done so much outlining. Like I didn't know what the next sentence would be. I didn't know what the next paragraph, but I knew what the next section was about, right? And especially, I mean, I had to throw out much of the outline when I got into it. It's probably the same for you, because as I'm sitting here writing, I was just going to write, I didn't know how many chapters. I thought maybe 15 or 20 chapters or something. And I'm writing, I'm thinking, oh my God, this is different. I need foundational chapters that I am going to keep referring back to. And I didn't even number them traditionally. I think I just called them foundational A, foundational B, foundational C, and then I'm going to start writing the book. So it took a very different turn at the end of every week, but it started to get into a groove where it just felt very natural as it came out finally.
Okay, let's talk about the book itself. It's early. The book hasn't launched yet. It's going to probably launch about the time this goes to air.
Right.
What was the book you set out to write? And from the vantage point now of it being finished and printed but not in the market, how close to that ideal or vision do you think you came?
The book I ended up writing is only about a third of the book that I envisioned. And I think partly because I was being a little self-conscious when I was outlining this book, where I just was so bent on providing value to the reader that I just stuffed all kinds of things in there. And as I wrote the book and then compared my progress against how long the outline was, I realized this is going to be a freaking encyclopedia that nobody's going to be interested in reading. Why don't I trim this way down and concentrate more on the things that are most important? And so the book I wrote is much shorter, and I just didn't even address so much of what I thought I was going to address. And if I wrote this book again, it probably could be even a third shorter. I don't know. You know, there is if it's a postcard, you can't charge $38 for it, obviously. So there's some diminishing value in return. But as I get older, and even in my consulting work, I mean, I'm spending so much less time with the actual recommendations. I'm trying to simplify them as much as possible. And this book, it still strikes me as it's uniquely short for the topic itself.
I want to ask you what the book is about, and let me ask it through my alternative question. I assume you had alternative titles if the business of expertise was one that you decided not to go with. What were some of your alternative titles?
Yeah, I thought about positioning and lead generation, about those ideas. I thought about not even having the tagline, the subtitle at the end. Everything involved the word expertise, but I got hung up quite a bit on exactly how to what to populate around that word expertise. But everything did have that word, and in a way, this feels like, I don't think of myself as a super passionate person. I think of myself more as an academic than a passionate person. But I did find myself so passionately believing what I'm saying in here, that this isn't just about expertise in terms of how to like position your business of expertise and then sell your business of expertise to clients. It's really more about, it's a passionate manifesto about the need for expertise. And it's like, get off of your butt and make some tough decisions and be an expert and impact your world. And it does feel like I almost got outside myself with excitement just around this idea of expertise. So there were lots of title options, but they all involve the word expertise.
So at the end of the day, this is a book for those in any expertise-based business that it's really a book on positioning the firm, or another way to think about positioning is the fundamental strategy of the firm and how that leads to your ability to generate leads and profit. Is that about right?
Right. And also a subset of those businesses that are also entrepreneurial in nature. So there would be many entrepreneurs that this book would not be written for, like somebody who's opening a string of gas stations, for instance, who are they're just as entrepreneurial, but they're not in the business of selling insight. And then there are many experts or insightful people that do that for a living who are not selling that entrepreneurially, and I'm not written the book for them as well. So, for instance, an architect or a lawyer or consultant at a big firm, this is written exclusively for that overlap between entrepreneurs and experts.
You're listening to Two Bobs, conversations on the art of creative entrepreneurship. Your hosts are David C. Baker of Recourses, author, speaker, and advisor to owners of expert firms, and Blair Enns of Win Without Pitching, the sales training and coaching program for creative entrepreneurs. For more information, go to twobobs.com. If you find this podcast helpful, please help us by telling a friend and rating us on iTunes. Thank you. Now back to David and Blair.
Okay, let's dive into the book and start with the foreword. It might be the best foreword I've ever read. It's disarming. I'll leave it to you to.
I'm glad it disarmed you. I didn't prepare you for it. So what happened is, and I don't. There's no secrets here. I mean, we can say anything we want.
Yeah,
don't need to hide anything. But I asked a few people to write a foreword for the book, and one person said yes, and they wrote it, and it's like, I'm not using that. It wasn't very good at all. And he said, well, just rewrite it. And I thought, well, I'm not going to do that either. It doesn't feel real to me. Like, I don't mind rewriting a little bit. And then one of the people that I asked is Derek Sivers, and I asked him if he would write a foreword, and he was kind enough to write me back, and he said no. He said for two reasons. One, I've got too many things going, and I've made a decision to not pick up anything new until I have finished the things I've started. And second, I haven't started a business in 5 years, and so I no longer own that title of entrepreneur. That expires, and so until I earn it again, I couldn't write a foreword to a book about entrepreneurship. And what immediately struck me about his response to me was like, well, Derek, I mean, you just took a lot of time telling me you're not going to write a foreword.
And you used it as the foreword.
Yeah. And I said, Derek, can I just use this like as a foreword not written by Derek Sivers? And he thought it was a really great idea. And so that's what it is. It was a strange thing, but it strikes me as a good example of how to, I guess, follow your own rules, so to speak.
So you got forward as and with an asterisk, and then you print his rejection letter saying, no, I'm not going to write you a forward. And he signs it. And then you have a little footnote that says, I've long admired Derek's thinking and decided to ask if he would write the forward. He declined, but his response illustrated how experts frequently say no to opportunity so that they can dig deeper with a laser focus. I asked Derek if I could print his refusal as the world's first not written by forward.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Maybe I should start doing that with my business, like not references. Like here's some.
Yeah, I think we've talked about that too before. I've saved some of the worst references where people saying, this is horrible, you don't know what you're doing, you're an idiot, this was the biggest mistake I've ever made. And there's a surprising number of those. And I've always been tempted. I'm doing a talk in London in a few weeks, and I'm using one of them in a talk to illustrate something. I think we'd be better served, everybody would be better served if we all shared some of those rejections. Yeah. But this really worked to tell the
Good.
story
I'm glad
that you
liked
wanted to tell. So the book, as you said, it's got 3 foundation chapters. I'd like to take a couple of minutes and just talk about each of those, and then maybe in a future podcast we'll dive into more of the specifics, but there's some specifics we can cover here. Your first foundation chapter, Chapter A, is Expertise Flows from Focus, which flows from positioning. That's kind of a recurring theme in your work, in my work, and in some of the conversations we've had in these podcasts. Why did you feel like that was the place to start this book?
I think because there just isn't anything to talk about until somebody has some significant expertise, and the expertise is never going to be there until they start to notice certain patterns, sort of like John does in A Beautiful Mind as the numbers roll down the walls. And then they're never going to get the opportunity to see those patterns unless they make some bold decisions about their own positioning, so that they see similar instances next to each other, so that the patterns that they might notice are actually meaningful. So it's those three things together. I focus so that I have the opportunity to see similar scenarios, so that I can then see patterns, so that I can then develop intelligence. And that's the core of the book. So there's three foundations, and that's one of them, but that's actually the most important foundation about how expertise actually happens as humans develop it.
A recurring theme throughout the book is this idea of just taking control of the business. I'm going to read maybe my favorite. Well, there's a lot of great quotes. You use some surprising language from time to time, which I found really enjoyable. I laughed out loud a lot during this book because I know you so well. And with each laugh, I was probably left wondering, I'm not sure if other people are going to laugh at this.
Oh, God. Well, maybe that's better if they're on an airplane. Well, when you say surprising language, do you mean because I'm a missionary kid or because...
Well, let me read one of my favorite quotes. This business needs to be your bitch. And if all you're doing is feeding a machine, it's time to stop and fashion your own statement and then test all your other decisions based on how they contribute to your balanced goal. So you get my attention with language like that. You also drop a few other bombs here and there. I call them Baker bombs.
That's pretty tame, though, as things go, I think. The people were expecting much worse word than bitch, I suspect.
Yeah, well, it's in there, right? You've covered other things. I do want to point out that you do open the book in this section talking about John Nash in the movie A Beautiful Mind. He walks in and he's told by the Air Force colonel or whomever it was, glad you could come, doctor, right this way. We've been intercepting radio transmissions from Russia. The computer can't detect a pattern, but we're sure it's a code. And Nash says, why is that, General? And the response from the general is, ever just know something, Dr. Nash? And his response is constantly. Yeah. And then you build on that. But I wrote in the actual book, because he's crazy. He sees patterns everywhere because he's crazy. And that seemed to elude you, Mr. Baker.
I should have picked another example. Well, okay, I'm going to overshare next, okay? I don't think I've ever told you this.
You have.
I have? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't told the rest of the people. So I never go see movies in theaters. I've seen typically one every 5 or so years. That's the most I ever see. And it's not because I don't love movies, because I do. It's just I can't sit still that long. So anyway, these folks talked me into going to see A Beautiful Mind with them. And it was a whole family. And I was sitting next to my wife, Julie, and I'm watching this movie. And I started crying like a baby. In fact, it was so embarrassing. I leaned over and I'm lying in my wife's lap crying. And this is the same consultant you're supposed to hire, right? but and it was because I felt like I'd met myself in this movie, and that's why it's made such an impression on me, and why I refer to different scenes in it. Because he was crazy, but he had, like in his personal life, he was crazy, but he had this mind that noticed patterns, that picked patterns up where other people didn't see them. And the reason I think that it's safe to use an example like that is because intelligence, the essence of intelligence is pattern matching. And we take this brilliant guy like Nash and we go all the way back to, say, a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, and we can test their intelligence with pattern matching before they can even speak. We can hold up duck, duck, goose, and they point to the goose. That's reverse pattern matching. And it demonstrates how the human mind uses patterns to develop intelligence, even way back, even before they get as crazy as John Nash. So the example is of a crazy guy, but I think it's just an extreme that illustrates the point about intelligence.
Yeah, and I'll just point out it's not fair to call him crazy. And I opened that can. He suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, and went on to win the Nobel Prize. And
it's a great movie too.
Oh, it's a beautiful movie. Now I've left with this image of you reading Duck, Duck, Goose to your grandkids and, crying like a baby. The supporting friend.
Yeah, thank you. Blair, thank you so much for this podcast. This is really helping my book sales.
Foundation Chapter B is expertise renders your work less interchangeable. Mm-hmm. I think that's fairly straightforward, but it's not so straightforward that everybody adheres to that advice, is it?
It isn't. And I had this realization one day that has really clarified it for me. If we think about this concept that there's distributed control in the best business relationships, not so much personal, I don't think it works there. That's not a good, safe way to look at it. But in business relationships, there's some distributed control. And your clients are exercising control in many different ways, like fighting you about the price or not getting you the information you need, but still holding you to a certain deadline. And, ultimately they can just fire you. And so in that relationship where the control is distributed, what control do you as the expert have in the relationship? And the answer is really, it boils down to just one thing. You can withhold your expertise. Well, so if you play that out, the degree to which the client can find a suitable substitute for your expertise is the degree to which you have actual control in the relationship. And the problem is they get to define what's a suitable substitute. And if they can find a suitable substitute within a week or two, then you have very little power in the relationship. You can't translate that power into any sort of pricing premium. So that's the notion, is that you have to narrow your positioning so that there is power in withholding it. You don't actually have to withhold it, but that power has to be there, or you can't translate it into a pricing premium.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I think, and you touched on this, some firms have that power. They're seen as meaningfully different, as having deep expertise, but the client can tell in the sale that they're not about to leverage it. They're just they may be the experts, but for whatever reason, they're still needy, and they're still letting the clients call the shots. So it's this issue of, the deep expertise and the positioning that comes from that is a source of your power or control in the buy-sell relationship. But then you have to,
It has to be used, right? It has to be, yeah. And you and I have talked about how so many well-positioned firms are actually not making money, and some firms that are not well-positioned at all are making lots of money, right? And
because they're better. They have a longer lever. They're better at leveraging the. Maybe that's a bad metaphor, but they're better at leveraging the little power that they have when other firms have more power and have a worse lever.
You used the word meaningful difference, I think, just a minute ago. So can you talk about what you mean by meaningful difference? Like, as opposed to say, our office is red, that's not meaningful. I mean, what do you mean by that word struck me as interesting.
Yeah, my friend Cal Harrison wrote a great book a few years ago that you published, Rockbench published, called The Consultant with Pink Hair.
Right.
And it's a
great book. Business novel.
It's a business novel, and it follows this partnership, these two partners who are consultants, and the one partner has this epiphany that he has to differentiate the firm, and he goes about the rest of the book trying to find the proper way to differentiate his firm. And they arrive at, one solution that they discard quickly is, well, if we need to stand out, we could just all dye our hair pink.
Oh, yeah. And not meaningful.
Yeah, so that's different. Okay, you're the only consultants with pink hair, but, what's the benefit to me, the client, of that?
Yeah.
Your third foundational chapter is excess opportunity yields a price premium for expertise. So excess opportunity, I feel like we've talked about this a little bit before, but you want to explain yourself, Mr. Baker? Excess opportunity yields a price premium for expertise.
You say that a lot. You want to explain it? I feel like you're a prosecuting attorney or something. Yeah, excess opportunity yields it. So it harks back a little bit to what we were just talking about, in the sense that some firms are just innately confident, and those firms can get by without a very powerful positioning, honestly. But for the rest of us yokels, like a consultant like me or you or somebody could tell them how good they are and say, hey, you should be charging so much more for your work. But until the marketplace, the paying marketplace, affirms that difference, then they don't really believe it. So the idea is that you size your firm in such a way that you still retain the ability to say no. And when you say no, the implication is that the client is saying yes. The client is saying, I want to work for you for this amount of money or whatever it is, or in this time frame, and you're saying no. And that little teeny distinction there is what slowly gives you the confidence to believe your own stuff. And if we could reach down and pull up their confidence level, that would be enough to put them on the same plane as some of these other firms with a longer lever, as you talk about it. But since that's not true for most firms, we have to generate more marketplace acceptance. And then as that occurs, as the marketplace affirms their value and agrees to pay the price, slowly that changes their mind about how much they're worth in the marketplace. And that excess opportunity, the ability to say no, it's all tied up together in that equation.
You got a great quote here. The right size of the firm is always this, slightly smaller than the amount of opportunity within reach.
Yeah, and that goes back to that bitch statement as well, because I just see so many firms who are a reflection of the marketplace's desire for them. And on the face of it, it's like, well, duh, of course that's true. They're going to be as big as the marketplace wants them to be, but I don't think that's the right answer. I think you decide how big your firm is going to be, and then you make it happen by other means, either with the right positioning, the right lead generation, and so on. But otherwise, you have a firm that's bouncing up and down based on what the marketplace wants them to be, and you're just along for the ride rather than making this business work for you. So it's all tied together in my mind in some strange way.
All right. I'm going to wrap up by just saying the name of the book again and telling people where they can get it. But then I want to close on a question. So the book is called The Business of Expertise, How Entrepreneurial Experts Convert Insight to Impact and Wealth by David C. Baker, published by Rockbench Publishing. And it's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and a few other places.
And Dan Pink endorses the book on the cover, too, which means a lot to me. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, Dan Pink's written the endorsement on the cover.
Yeah.
So here's the final question I want to close with. It's 5 years from today, and you and I are celebrating the fact that the Nashville Predators have just won Game 7 of the Stanley Cup. And you're really happy with what this book has done in the last 5 years. What's happened? What's the impact this book has had?
I have energized thousands of people about their own pursuit of expertise. It sold 100,000 copies. I'm speaking to the audiences that really appreciate it. I've already written 2 other books, and I'm still surprised that we're friends.
We should end that right there.
Yeah.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Blair.
Thank you for listening to Two Bobs with David C. Baker and Blair Enns. Subscribe and learn more at twobobs.com. That's the number 2, BOBS.com.